The face that walked away. People in Gray Hollow trusted faces. That was their mistake. In a town where nothing ever changed, faces were anchors. You recognized the butcher by his scarred chin, the librarian by her crooked glasses, the sheriff by his permanent squint. Faces meant safety, familiarity, proof that yesterday had really happened. The monster understood this better than any human ever could. James Carter noticed it weeks before the body was found. It was small at first, the kind of thing you convince yourself you imagined. Mrs. Evelyn Moore waved at him from her porch one morning, just like she always did. Same time, same knitted cardigan, same thin smile. But her eyes didn't crinkle. They stayed wide and flat, as if she were remembering how smiling was supposed to work. James waved back anyway. In Gray Hollow, you didn't question old women. You didn't question routine. That night, he dreamed of faces hanging on hooks. When James entered Mrs. Moore's house, the silence felt thick. The dog was still barking, but it sounded distant, muffled, like it was underwater. The light was on. A pie sat cooling on the counter, untouched. Mrs. Moore lay on the floor. Her blood hadn't splattered. It had poured, carefully, deliberately. The cut across her throat was precise, almost respectful. Whoever, or whatever, had done it had taken its time. But the skin around her face told a different story. It sagged unnaturally, pulled tight in places, loose in others. Her mouth had been stretched too wide, as if someone had tried to remove her smile and failed. James gagged when he saw the fingernail marks beneath her jaw, as if she'd tried to tear her own face off. Gray Hollow mourned for exactly 3 days. Then the diner reopened. The church held a service. People nodded gravely and returned to their routines. They always did. The sheriff told everyone it was a robbery gone wrong. James noticed no one asked why nothing was stolen. That same week, James saw Mrs. Moore again. She was standing across the street from his apartment, watering flowers that had died years ago. She looked fine. Too fine. Her skin was smoother, younger. Her hands moved stiffly, as if unsure where to go next. When James blinked, she was gone. The second death was louder. 16-year-old Connor Hale was found screaming in his bedroom by his parents, except the scream wasn't his. It was several voices at once, layered and wet, like something struggling to choose which throat to use. By the time they broke down the door, Connor was dead. His neck snapped backward at an impossible angle. His face had been rearranged. His eyes were too far apart. His mouth had been moved slightly higher, like someone had been guessing where it belonged. The mirror in his room was shattered from the inside. James stopped sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes, he dreamed of a thing standing in front of a mirror, peeling itself layer by layer, whispering names it had already forgotten. At the archive, he dug deeper. He found photographs from the 1940s showing town picnics, faces smiling at the camera. In the corner of one photo, a man stared directly at James. The same man appeared again in a 1972 graduation photo, and again in a church photo dated 1999. Same face, same expression. No aging, no name. Someone had scratched him out of every caption. Alan noticed it before James said anything. "Do you ever feel like people here aren't tired anymore?" Alan whispered one night at the archive. What? They don't yawn. They don't complain about sleep. It's like exhaustion just left them. The next day, Alan didn't show up for work. James found him at his desk. Alan's hands were folded neatly. His body looked untouched until James stepped closer. Alan's face had been split open from the forehead down, peeled back like a book cover. Underneath was something pale and slick, still pulsing faintly, like muscle that hadn't realized it was dead yet. The smell was unbearable. Behind James, someone cleared their throat. "Hey," Alan said, alive, smiling, wearing his face.
"You shouldn't stare," it told James softly. "It makes the seams visible." James backed away, heart slamming against his ribs. "What are you?" he whispered. The thing shrugged, Alan's shoulders creeping slightly. "A survivor," it said. "A parasite, if you prefer honesty." Its face rippled, just for a second. James saw dozens of other faces beneath it, men, women, children, pressed together, screaming silently. "I can't exist without you," it continued, "but I don't belong to any of you either." James learned the truth too late. The monster didn't just kill bodies, it killed identity. It stalked its victims for weeks, memorizing them, practicing their expressions, their voices, their habits. It fed on recognition, on the moment someone said, "Oh, that's just you." Then it struck, sometimes brutally, sometimes quietly. Once it wore someone long enough, the original face began to rot, so it needed another and another.
As the deaths increased, people stopped noticing. That was the scariest part. The gas station clerk died, and a new one appeared the next day. No one questioned the missing wedding ring. A teacher vanished. A new teacher arrived, identical in every way, except her reflection blinked out of sync. James screamed at people in the street. "They're not real," he yelled. "They're wearing skin." People stared at him with pity. Some smiled too wide. The monster cornered James in his apartment. It wore James's own face, perfectly. "You understand now," it said gently. "You've always been curious. That's why I like you." James lunged for the mirror. The reflection screamed. The next morning, Gray Hollow woke up without James Carter. His name had never been on the lease. His childhood photos showed another boy. His mother remembered only one son, a man who waved every morning at 7:10 a.m. The monster doesn't leave Gray Hollow. It doesn't need to. Towns like this exist everywhere. Places where no one wants change, where familiarity matters more than truth. The monster feeds on that. And right now, it's wearing someone you trust. It's been practicing their smile. Gray Hollow did not panic. That alone should have terrified James more than anything else. In other towns, 5 murders would have brought state police, news vans, outsiders with questions and bright lights. But Gray Hollow responded the way it always did, by closing ranks. People lowered their voices. Curtains stayed drawn longer in the evenings. Doors were locked earlier. But no one talked about leaving. Leaving implied something was wrong, and Gray Hollow did not like that idea. At the diner, the conversations drifted around the deaths like water around a stone. Terrible business. Such a shame. Anyway, did you hear they're fixing the bridge? James noticed something else. Every time a name was spoken aloud, one of the dead, someone nearby flinched, just slightly, as if the name scratched against something fragile inside their head, as if it didn't belong there anymore. The seventh death happened at the edge of town. Martha Ellison, a nurse who worked night shifts, was found in her bathtub. The water was still warm. Her wrists were slit. Except there was no blood. Not in the tub, not on the floor, not in the pipes. Her body had been drained clean, skin pale and waxy, eyes sunken inward like something had hollowed her out. The coroner said it was impossible. James knew better. The monster wasn't just stealing faces anymore, it was consuming what was underneath. James began to notice mistakes. A man at the grocery store rang up items twice, forgetting he'd already done it. A woman laughed too late at jokes. Children stared at their parents with quiet confusion, as if something familiar had shifted just enough to feel wrong. Reflections became unreliable. Mirrors showed smiles that hadn't been made yet. Eyes blinked out of sequence. Sometimes a face lingered even after the person walked away. James started marking houses on a map. Places where people had died, places where people had returned. The pattern formed a circle, and at its center, the town square. There was one place James hadn't checked. The old church basement, sealed off decades ago after a fire no one could quite remember. The lock was already broken. Inside, the air was thick with rot and something sweeter, like spoiled fruit. Candles lined the walls, melted down to stubs. The floor was covered in scratch marks. And faces. Not masks, discarded skins. They lay folded, crumpled, some partially torn, others carefully peeled and set aside like clothing that might be worn again. James vomited. On the far wall, written again and again in different handwriting, was the same sentence. It hurts to stay one thing. The truth came slowly, like infection. The monster was not born in Gray Hollow. It had arrived. Decades ago, something had crawled out of the woods after a fire, burned and unfinished. It had no face of its own, only need, pain, hunger. The first person who found it tried to help. The monster learned from that kindness. Skin healed it, identity stabilized it, recognition anchored it to reality. And once it understood that, it never stopped. The monster followed rules no one had written down. It couldn't take someone unless they were known. It couldn't wear a face that no one recognized. And once it replaced someone completely, once everyone accepted the new version, the original was erased. Not just killed, unremembered. That was the true horror. Death was temporary, forgetting was forever. James tried to warn them one last time. He stood in the town square and screamed until his throat bled. "It's wearing you. It's learning us. You're already dead if you're remembered wrong." People gathered, listened, smiled. A woman stepped forward, someone James had known his entire life. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Her skin felt cold, too tight. "You look tired, James," she said gently. "You should rest." Behind her, the crowd's faces shifted, just slightly, like a deck of cards being reshuffled. The monster came to James that night, wearing no face at all. Its surface rippled, half-formed features rising and collapsing like drowning shapes. "I could stop killing," it said, "if I had a permanent place." James understood immediately. It wanted him. Someone curious, someone observant, someone already half erased. "I'll be you," the monster whispered, "and you can finally rest." James laughed. Then he smashed every mirror in his apartment. The monster screamed, not in pain, but in confusion. Its form destabilized, faces tearing away from one another. For the first time, it fled. Grey Hollow survived. Mostly. Some people left, unable to explain why the town felt wrong. Others stayed and forgot there had ever been a problem. James lives on the outskirts now, barely remembered, barely seen. But he watches, because the monster didn't die. It learned. And sometimes, late at night, when a familiar face hesitates just a moment too long before smiling, James knows it's starting again. The collapse did not begin with screams. It began with hesitation. People stopped greeting each other by name. At first they blamed exhaustion, stress, grief. But the truth was simpler and far worse. They were no longer sure who anyone was. A woman stood in the post office for nearly an hour, staring at the clerk behind the counter. "I know you," she whispered. "I just don't know from where." The clerk smiled politely. His name badge was blank. By the end of the week, mirrors were being covered. In bathrooms, in shops, in the school locker rooms. Too many people had seen it now. Reflections that lagged, reflections that anticipated movement, reflections that smiled when mouths stayed still. One man shattered every mirror in his house after watching his reflection continue brushing its teeth after he stopped. The next morning, his wife swore he had never existed. There was an extra toothbrush in the sink. No one questioned it. Children were the first to stop recognizing their parents. They stared too long, flinched when touched, asked questions no adult could answer. "Why do you sound like Mommy but smell different? Why do you blink so slow? Why do you wear Daddy's face wrong?" Several children went missing. Not abducted, returned. They came home quieter, compliant. Their drawings changed, stick figures with too many eyes, faces stacked inside faces, mouths sewn shut. Teachers stopped assigning art. It happened at the town meeting. The mayor stood at the podium, voice calm, assuring everyone there was no danger, that panic was the real threat, that Grey Hollow had always taken care of its own. Halfway through his speech, a woman screamed. She pointed at his face. "That's not how you look," she cried. "That's not how you used to look." The mayor paused. For a fraction of a second, his smile slipped. Then his skin tore. Not cleanly, not quickly. It split at the corners of his mouth and eyes, peeling back in wet ribbons. Beneath it was something pale, quivering, unfinished, faces pushing up from underneath like they were trying to breathe. The crowd erupted. Some ran, some froze, some recognized themselves in what they saw and began screaming too. By the time the building emptied, the mayor's body was gone. Someone else locked the doors. The minutes listed him as resigned. After that, the monster no longer hid. It didn't need to. People began accusing each other. Families turned inward. Friends locked doors against friends.
Anyone who hesitated before answering a question was suspect. Wrong smile, wrong tone, wrong pause. People were dragged into basements. Mirrors were forced into their faces. Some begged. Some tore themselves apart trying to prove they were real. And some changed. James watched from the edge of town as the population thinned, not through death alone, but through replacement. The monster wasn't one thing anymore. It had multiplied. The truth became impossible to deny. The monster was no longer just wearing faces. It was teaching others how. People who had been worn too long began to slip, their reflections distorted, their memories fragmented. They learned the trick. Peel, stretch, pretend. Identity became currency. If you killed someone and wore them well enough, you survived. If you failed, you were forgotten. Bray Hollow became a town of masks, pretending there was still a town underneath. James's map was almost useless now. Entire streets no longer aligned with memory. Houses shifted, names changed overnight. Roads led to places that didn't exist yesterday. The town was editing itself in real time. James realized something then, something final. Gray Hollow was becoming the monster's true face. Not one body, not one identity, an entire place. A few people tried to leave. Cars stalled at the town limits, engines died, phones lost signal. GPS showed empty space where the town should be. Those who walked out were found days later wandering back in, confused, unable to explain why they'd left. Some came back wearing unfamiliar faces. Some came back without faces at all. Eventually, no one tried anymore. The monster made one mistake. It forgot James, not because he hid well, but because too many people had stopped believing he was real. He became a gap in memory, a missing word, a thought that slipped away. That made him invisible. James entered the old church basement one last time. The walls were alive now, faces pressing out from the wood, whispering, pleading to be worn again. At the center of the room, the thing that had started it all pulsed like a heart. A mass of identities fused together, a god built from recognition. James set the fire. Gray Hollow burned for 3 days. Smoke rose, lights flickered, screams echoed, and then stopped. When the fire died, the town still stood, untouched, whole, perfect. Too perfect. The monster had learned something new. Fire erased faces, but places? Places could remember forever. Gray Hollow does not appear on modern maps. Satellite images blur over it. Records contradict themselves. Anyone who searches too hard forgets what they were looking for. But sometimes, a traveler stops for gas in a town they don't remember driving into. Everyone smiles politely. No one blinks enough, and the town feels relieved because it is hungry, and you look familiar.